We can have an infantry squad right now take one of your products or someone else's products and put eyes or fires onto a target in a matter of minutes that currently takes best case to put steel on target with organic mortars in your infantry company, best case 5 minutes. You can do that now in probably 90 seconds. Can you imagine how that puts your enemy in this dilemma, man?
This is Dan Meiji, host of the Drone Wars podcast, where we talk about all things autonomous systems, air, land, sea, and space. And this week, we're joined by Chris Miller, former acting Secretary of Defense and current Chief Strategy Officer at Design, who's going to tell us all about how he sees autonomous systems changing the battlefield.
This is Dan Meiji, CEO. And
Dan, is that how you pronounce I've been pronouncing your last name wrong for how many years now?
2.5.
2.5. Do you remember when we met?
Yeah, of course. There's things you learn you don't care about. And when everyone pronounces your name wrong your whole life, you just let it slide off your back.
I want to apologize in public for saying your last name wrong for 2.5 years, Dan.
I don't think anyone's ever said your last name wrong.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to get.
Pretty easy one, right?
Hey, man, Christopher Miller in the Department of Defense database for like your email. I was Christopher Miller 26. So people get worried about having your account hacked. I'm like, nah, there are a lot of us.
Yeah, you got to like actually pick the right target. You know what I mean? Man. And so when you went in, they're probably now at Christopher Miller like 130 at this point, right?
The best part when I left the Department of Defense, I was acting SecDef at the end.
Yep.
And you get your ID card. I have a retired ID card, and I started I still go on like Quantico to buy booze and stuff because it's cheap there, and my ID card wasn't working and the date was good. And the Marine would be like, you're good. Finally, I'm at Pensacola. I want to go to the Navy Museum down there, which is like one of the best aviation museums in the world.
Okay.
I don't have any luck this time. The person's like, your card is expired. I said, no, the date's fine. I get this mean government employee lady who takes my card and I lose it. So somebody in the Department of Defense hacked the system and made me dead.
Turned you off.
Because I clearly wasn't a supporter of the last administration, which I really respected and appreciated. I was like, that was well played. Because I basically was dead for a while.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people wanted, by the way, but that's all right.
Well, I think you're a pretty nice guy. I have a question though. Are you alive again? So are you not paying civilian prices for booze?
No, I still go to Quantico.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got that was the only reason I had to get my ID card reestablished.
Of course.
Yeah,
got to hit the exchange.
Yeah, you have to hit the exchange, man. Thanks for having me on, Dan. Do you remember when we first met? I remember. You don't.
I did not
like you at all.
That is absolutely not true.
I did not like. You came in and we were talking counter UAS, and of course, we're learning. And you, of course, have been very successful in that space and using California terminology. We're in Cali, baby.
I know. It's a
San
big
Diego.
Word.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You're not in an industry.
Space.
You're in space.
So, and you came in and just started telling us the deal. And I was like, either this guy is the greatest dude I've ever met or he is a complete poser. Fortunately, it was the former, not the latter. And thanks for having me on, man. Congratulations on Firestorm. You remember you threw this one out? I was like, I don't know, man. And wow, it's just fun to be here and see what you guys have done. This team you've got is next level, man. And Dan, I don't know, man. I think it's kind of existential we get this right. I think we're still maybe investing a little too much in the F-35 and these manned aircraft. And I think we see, we're driving up. We drove down. We were up in Irvine. We drove down. Is that the I-5?
Yeah, it is.
Come down the I-5 and you go by, what's the Marine base?
Pendleton.
And there was one of those amphibs where they were kicking the Marine Amtraks or whatever they call them now off the back. And, I'll tell you what, I had this really weird, strange historical idea. In the old days, if you would see that off the coast, you'd be like, oh, we're in trouble now. You want to know what I thought this time? I was like, holy cow, how has the world changed? That's a target now. If it can be seen from land, and if I was an opponent or an enemy, I would have been like, we got something for you. And at a minimum, we're going to clear all your antennas off and all your comms off at a minimum.
Did you notice how there's no cages on any of those either? It's terrifying with what you can see happening every single day in Ukraine and how everyone's adjusting how they're protecting their armor. And then you go by Pendleton and you see none of these protective layers being put on our armored vehicles.
Well, let's go there. What's going on?
Well, I think they're trying to decide how they're going to adjust to the threat, right? But as you and I both know, like the threat evolves every 3 to 6 weeks, right?
Dan, I hear they're iterating in Ukraine now about every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
2 to 8 weeks is the development cycle. How long does it take to produce a weapon system in the United States? I believe it depends which you're reading. Best case 6 years, more traditionally for a major system, 30-ish, 25, 30?
Probably. I mean, it just depends on like what they're willing to accept along the way. You know what I mean? And so we're talking years in between iterative cycles. So by the time a weapon system hits the battlefield, it's out of date. You know, I'm sure you experienced that with some of the gear and equipment you used throughout your career.
Man, you're trying to make me old.
You're not that old.
Dude, I remember going in Afghanistan in 2001, and there was always this talk about, yeah, you don't have your equipment now, but if you go to war, there's this like, they used to call it like the black warehouse. The doors would open and you would walk in and you would like, oh, here's what I've always wanted. Well, you know what? The warehouse actually ended up being REI, and we went and Dan, Garmin E-Trex. Now, of course, GPS. We had these pluggers, these things. I bet you they were like $25,000, $30,000 a piece, and you'd get one for every squad. No, you wouldn't even get one for squad. You get one for platoon, 40 people, right? And we're like, Green Berets, that's not going to cut it, and that's a little heavy. We went and bought all these E-Trex, like every E-Trex in the world.
There was the little handheld ones, right?
They were about the size of your cell phone, dude.
Yeah.
I have mine. I kept mine because, and it still works. So that was my experience. That was my first experience with like when the balloon goes up, when the shit hits the fan, there's no, you go with what you got or what you can buy quickly.
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global HQ in San Diego. From our custom-built studio inside one of our hero products, a modular industrial-grade manufacturing facility designed to be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours for on-demand drone production. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from top industry leaders, sharing the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and bold predictions that they have for the next 5 to 10 years in autonomous systems and advanced manufacturing. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure you like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, back to the show.
Oh, hey, can I go off script a little bit more? A Wall Street Journal yesterday. Did you read about the Patriot interceptor missiles are in worldwide shortage? I was out recently and talked to somebody in the business that was overseas where they are keeping track of every Patriot missile because guess what? The defense industrial base can't produce them fast enough. What did we see? Iranians have 2,000 ballistic missiles. How many interceptors do we probably have in theater right now? I don't know. Like I'm clearly not read on anymore. It's certainly not 2,000.
Yeah, probably in the hundreds is my guess, if that.
So what are we going to do about it?
I mean, that's
Mr. How do you pronounce your last name again?
Meiji.
I always say Maggie.
That's fine.
Is that?
I don't get offended.
Is that Hungarian?
The family name's Majinski, but they had one of those moments when they came to America. They left Ellis Island with a new last name. And so there's a lot of stories in the family lore about how did we go from a ski to a 4-letter last name, right? But they did transit through Hungary, and that's our guess, is they were coming through Magyar, and they just saw Majinski and shortened it. But we don't know.
It's a good family. It's good for, Thanksgiving.
Yeah, some good trivia.
I never asked you this one. I know you're supposed to be interviewing me. Why did you ruck back up and get back into this industry. Hey, Dan, this is, as you know, defense tech, defense contracting is without a doubt the most complicated, frustrating, infuriating, most difficult business you could ever choose, and you did it again. What were you thinking? And does your wife think this is a good idea?
Well, she just wants me to basically not bother her at home, right? So she's happy with that part of it. But to answer your question, for me, it's about mission. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember when the counter UAS systems we were building at Citadel went to Iraq and Syria to go fight ISIS, and they were using DJI drones for, to drop bombs, to use artillery spotting. And some of them, they even put warheads on the top and kamikazed them into things. And I was like, how the hell is ISIS, with things that cost hundreds or a couple $1,000s a piece, able to fight to a standstill for a number of months in places like Mosul and Raqqa, right? The best trained, best equipped forces in the world to a complete standstill. And I was like, that asymmetrical technology needs to exist. And it should allow the US to not put our troops in harm's way if we can democratize the sky and get this type of technology into all our allies' hands, right? Let them be the hedge against an aggressive neighbor. You know what I mean? And going back to the start of the war in Ukraine, remember when all the armored vehicles were stuck in the mud? Can you imagine if they had the FPVs today?
Yeah.
I mean, that invasion would have ended in 48 hours, right? They would have just blown everything up. But we didn't think of the world that way, that asymmetrical technologies, commercial technologies like your Garmin example, could be deployed in mass throughout a conventional military and fundamentally change the battle space, right? And it's about speed of production. It's about interoperability of parts. And then as our business has evolved, we think that manufacturing is key, right? So all those things lead to this mission and the idea that we should do better as a country. We can build things again here, but we just need to take the initiative to do it. And we've been lucky to find supporters in the DoD and in the investment community along the way who buy into this mission and who see a changing world where, before the war in Ukraine, a lot of the allied countries we talked to, they felt they were a couple years behind the curve with drones. Now a lot of them feel like they're a decade behind. So if we can provide them the means of production, right, and then the software to modify the drone, which is kind of like core to what we do, I think that actually pays dividends for the U.S. in the long run because hopefully we keep our guys out of harm's way.
I like the swag. I like the Firestorm swag, but you probably need to have an emblem for you as the boss of Sisyphus, of pushing this rock up the hill and the challenges that you face every day, man. I just want to tell you how much I respect not just you, but the other people that are in this industry that see that there's a transformation of warfare going on right now. This isn't rocket scientists. Rocket scientist? No, this isn't. Well, it could be rocket scientist. It's not rocket science that we're seeing it's not an evolution because war is a constant. It's a cycle. It's a circle, and we're going back to quantity over quality. And our Department of Defense, has argued that they understand that there's this transformation of war going on, but we haven't seen the outcome. You guys are we're all fighting for the same piece of the pie. A couple years ago, the innovation ecosystem in the Department of Defense was about $1 billion a year. We're talking DIU, we're talking AFWorks, all those efforts. The budget this year, I think, was about $4 billion, which everybody's like, 4X, this is great. I said, hey, by the way, it's $1 trillion budget. So I'm not going to do public math on this show and embarrass myself in front of you got 2.5 million viewers right now. So I don't want to embarrass myself. But that I know is much smaller than 1%. And I kind of got upset with the self-congratulatory. We've increased it by 4. And hey, I hear 80% of that is going to a few companies. And the rest of us are literally fighting for table scraps. I'm reading this book right now called Freedom's Forge, which talks about the industrialization of the American base, defense industrial base, right before World War II. And, that's the kind of thing where they were building B-17s and B-25s and all this stuff at scale, and they brought private industry. And my lesson learned from that was there's this idea that the government's going to solve the problem. The government realized that only the free market can create the capabilities that are needed to fight and win World War II. So they relied on private industry. I'm not seeing that yet. I really love to see what we're in California, met with a bunch of venture capital people learning about that stuff. And there's this desire to help, but there has to be a return on investment. And I'm really worried, Dan, and you're way smarter on this than I am, but it's almost like there's a bubble right now.
Yeah. You're totally right.
Am I off on that?
No, I think like what the DoD needs to make sure they're realizing is that there's been billions of dollars of free chicken. So it's private citizens, it's venture capital funds that have invested into defense tech startups. And unless you know how the game is played, right? And there's like a big wink there, a lot of these companies are not going to exist in 18 months. I hate to say it.
But isn't that absolutely fundamentally necessary to support those that are going to go out there and do the fighting and dying? That the answer isn't in the 5 defense primes. Hey, let's be clear. Like if you want to make a tank or a 5th generation or 6th generation aircraft, they're the ones to do it.
They're the guys. Yep.
But if you want to produce at scale with 3D printing, advanced manufacturing, quick iteration, that's going to happen here in America in small factories. You got a big factory here, but this isn't a million square foot. No. But you can produce aircraft here in one day that basically can have the same effect as an F-35 for a fraction of the cost. Yeah. Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, it is. It's all about mass. It's about cost and mass, right? And we're still thinking that we're going to have the technology that allows us to kind of like outcompete other folks. And maybe that was different when you were in Afghanistan. You're fighting dudes in flip-flops with AKs, right? But
they won.
Yeah, I know. And now we're fighting armies of PhDs, right? In places like Iran, China, and Russia. And they're working together and they're coordinating and they're sharing TTPs and they're sharing technology and they're building drone factories in each other's country. And I don't think we've quite woken up to that.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.